Today in graphic design, we're going to be learning about effective communication. And this effective communication presentation can be applied to all parts of your life, not just graphic design. However, within graphic design, we're going to be using our designs to target certain audiences and certain people. And to do that, we need to know what affects those people. To be an effective communicator, you need to follow certain principles and be a good listener. And we're going to talk about these things today about how to effectively communicate what we want to communicate to other people. Okay, what I want you to do first is take a look at these 4 logos that I put on this slide. We've got Quicksilver up in the right, MTV, ESPN, and Rock Band. And I really want you to take a minute and ask yourself, what do you think of these logos? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Why do you like them or not like them? Can you even answer those questions? Or is it just, I like the MTV one, but I'm not sure why? Or I like ESPN, it looks cool, that kind of thing. Is it a vague answer or is it a specific answer? Take a minute and ask yourself these 2 questions, and then let's move on to the next slide. Okay, thinking back to those logos, what do you think those logos are trying to communicate? Who are they trying to communicate to? Think of these questions because we're going to go back to those logos at the end of the presentation after we've learned about communication. So what is communication? First of all, communication is an exchange of information which requires a source and an audience. The source doesn't have to be a person. The source can be one of those logos. It can be a flyer. It can be a billboard. The source can be the computer. The source could be another person via cell phone, that type of thing. So remember, a source, which can be pretty much anything that's giving you information, and an audience who's receiving that information. So I just gave you a bunch of examples of this, but how do we communicate? So remember, communication is an exchange of information between a source and an audience. So how do we communicate? Think of 5 ways, really quick, off the top of your head. 5 ways. List them off. Say them out loud. The slide will not move on until you say them out loud. I haven't heard you yet. Okay, well, let's move on. Here's some different ways that I thought of communication. Face-to-face, texting, IM, written notes, emails, faxes, letters, braille, images, music. Can you think of anything different than those ways of communication that I've already listed? There's tons of ways of communication. What about webcam? You know, recording video, audio, that type of thing. Music. Oh, I already said that. It's on the list. Okay, there's lots of different ways to communicate. However, do you communicate differently with those that you know? Say, your friend versus maybe Mrs. Tonks, the principal of OHSU. So think about it. What about communicating with your mom? What about communicating with your siblings? When we compare the way we communicate, we find that we communicate extremely differently with the people or the things that we're interacting with, like friends versus your parents, or we communicate differently with our parents versus than we would with our principal, or our friends versus just a person we just met, that type of thing. So there's all sorts of different types of communication for different audiences. Remember, what's the definition of communication? Information between a source and an audience. And when we have different audiences, we communicate differently. Now, how do you think that affects logo design? Keep that in mind as we go on. we're going to look at 5 principles of effective communication so that we can learn how to communicate better, and it will make us better designers because we'll be able to effectively communicate what we want to. The principles are: 1. Listen and understand. 2. Appropriate feedback. 3. Know your purpose and message. 4. Achieve credibility. And 5. Know your audience. So let's look at each of these in a little bit of depth. The first principle of effective communication is listen and understand. Why do you think it's important to listen and understand somebody? Well, I'll answer my own question here. It's important to listen to somebody and understand what they're saying so that you can get the right message from them. How do I show them that I'm listening and understanding? Well, a lot of times we can, if we're talking to somebody, there's lots of visual cues we can give them, like our body language can be a huge indicator of if we're listening and we're understanding what they're saying. Or if I was having a conversation with you, I might say, while you were going through your conversation so that they have the verbal cue of me showing my understanding. So how can we communicate so that others will understand us? What I try and do is I try and be as simple and concise as possible and not use tons of filler words so that other people can understand me clearly and concisely. There's lots of other ways. Can you think of other ways of how you communicate so that others will understand you? Maybe you would write it down if you wanted it to be really clear. In every form of communication, there's an encoder and a decoder. And if I was delivering a message to you as my student, I would encode my message and I would send it to you, and you would decode my message, and that's how we're communicating. Remember, me is the source, you is the audience. Me is the encoder, you is the decoder. Now on the next slide, there's a video clip of a message that is being sent, and I want you to see who the encoder is and who the decoder is, and what happens when the message might get messed up between the encoder and the decoder.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So what happened in that video clip? Well, the guy who was receiving the message from the people on the sinking ship did not decode the message properly. He took the information and did not understand it, and therefore the communication was not effective because the message was not understood. So that's an important part of listening and understanding, because you need to make sure that your message is going straight from the encoder to the decoder. That video clip is also a great example of appropriate feedback. What is feedback? Well, here we go on the slide right here, this third bullet point. The feedback you get is one way you can know if the decoder understood your message. So feedback might be me summarizing the message that you gave to me so that I can make sure I understood it. Why do you think feedback is part of effective communication? Like I just said, you can make sure that the decoder understood your message. And in the case of the we are syncing message, the decoder did not understand the message. Therefore, the communication was not effective. And the feedback was not appropriate. So, when you're communicating, feedback is an integral part of seeing how well you communicated and if the people you're communicating to actually understood your message. The third principle of effective communication is to know your purpose and message. What do you think this means, to know your purpose and message, and why is it a part of effective communication? Well, what I think is that if you don't know your message, you're not going to be able to communicate it to the people that you're trying to communicate to. We need to understand what we want to say in order to communicate it effectively. Because if we don't know what we want to say, then we're not going to be able to communicate it. For example, right now I'm recording voice narration on a SlideRocket presentation. If I pull up a slide and I just start recording my voice and I'm not ready and I don't know what to say, I can't communicate the points on that slide effectively to you because I don't know what I'm saying in the first place. The other part of know your purpose and message is to know the intended outcome of the message. For example, when I communicate to you with an advertisement, I'm going to want you to buy Coke after you see the advertisement, or vote no, or think that Burger King is better than this brand. So not only do you need to know what you want to say to communicate your thoughts or your meanings, but you're wanting to communicate what's you're intending the outcome to be, which is different than the message you're trying to communicate. The fourth principle of effective communication is to achieve credibility. And what this means is just be honest in your advertising and your message. So, like, don't say 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this product when only 8 do or something. You want people to look at your company and to think and feel like you're good because you're honest, you're full of integrity, you've got their back if they need it. If you don't have credibility as a company, then anything you communicate is not going to be effective because people aren't going to believe you. So make sure that when you're communicating, you've achieved credibility, whether it's with your parents or with an advertisement campaign, that type of thing. Your message will not go correctly to the decoder if you don't have credibility. The fifth principle of effective communication is to know your audience. And we already covered how we communicate differently with those that we know versus those that we don't know. Like, remember, communicate differently with our friends, maybe texting casually or a formal letter to the principal, that type of thing. So, if you know your audience, how does that help you communicate effectively? Well, in my opinion, I think it helps me communicate effectively because I know how to interact with that person or thing or whatever, and I know what's going to be able to make them understand the message that I'm intending. I also use different types of language around other people, and the language I use could also help me communicate more effectively. What type of language would you use if you were in an informal setting for a newsletter, email, or a formal setting, maybe a banquet menu or something? So you're going to use your different types of language for formal versus informal settings. Our language and demeanor is very different when we know our audience. And that's what's really key, is that we know our audience, we're going to be able to adjust ourselves to communicate better for the people or things that we're around. So now let's take a look back at these logos that we looked at the first. You answered, did you like them, did you not like them, and why or why not? And I'm betting that you couldn't really pinpoint a reason why you liked it or why not. You just knew that you thought it was cool or you thought it was lame. So let's look at some of these logos, and are they effective in their communication? Who do you think that these logos' intended audiences are? Maybe you students? ESPN targets, males. Quicksilver, a male cool clothing line. MTV, adolescents. Rock band, adolescents. They're all trying to communicate to their target audience, which is you. So do you think these logos are effective in their communication? Do they have credibility? Have they done their research? Listen and understand their audience? Maybe they've gotten feedback from different people who may like them or not like them. What's their intended purpose or message that they're trying to get across to you? That they're fun and cool and hip? Do they have credibility? And finally, with the design of these logos, did these logos or logo designers know their audience well enough to design it so that the audience likes the logo, likes the brand, feels good things when they look at it? Throughout the rest of the semester in graphic design, we're going to be talking a lot about communication and how our designs can communicate different things to our audiences. Remember these principles of communication and how they can help you. They're going to be able to help enhance your designs. When you know what you want to communicate, you'll be able to communicate it even better.